Okay. I'd like to call to order the City of Avalon budget meeting of October 19th. Should we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
We should.
Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm sorry I didn't come up with a proper invocation for budget, so
Are we still
so let's just have a seat.
A moment of silence for the budget.
And roll call, please.
Councilmember Albers.
Here.
Councilmember Olson.
Here.
Councilmember Hernandez.
Here.
And Mayor Marshall.
Here.
And for the record, Mayor Pro Tem Cassidy is absent today.
Thank you.
Okay. First, I want to thank Council for their patience as we've gone through our fiscal year 16-17 audit and letting us have the time this extra week to put things together, and for always your dedication to the city and your time today. Staff has trimmed what we could from our budget, and unfortunately the rest is going to be up to you. We've hit the CIP list pretty hard. We've deferred some projects. We have kept in anything we knew that would be affected by grant monies to move it along, and keeping in mind grant deadlines. We will come forward with another special meeting with you guys to just talk about our CIP projects. Staff will do their recommendation of what we think is the priority, then it will be up to you guys to confirm or rearrange them, how you would like to lay it out. Mr. Greenlaw, in one of the cities he was out, there was a whole policy for that, and so we are looking into that to refine that for your council. So Matt has sent everybody the PowerPoint presentation and all your attachments last night. Sorry you didn't get the agenda any earlier yesterday. We were still trying to fine-tune it. And so Matt will go through and answer any questions that you might have, and we'll figure out.
And Matt, if you could do me a favor, if you're not going to be at the dais, could you move that screen? Because I can't see you.
All right.
Thanks.
It doesn't move too far.
Turn it over, turn it down.
Maybe flip it down?
Flip it down.
Sideways.
Does that,
Okay.
that work?
That's better, yes, thank you.
All right.
I want to see your handsome face.
Thank you. So the first two slides are just a comparison of the fund balance schedule that was presented to council last on August 7th compared to the one that we're presenting tonight. So this is the estimated fund balance for fiscal year 17-18, the year that would have concluded in June. The beginning balance numbers for the one that presented in August, we're using the cash balance as of the last fiscal year 16 audit, plus or minus our unaudited revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 17. The next slide shows the fiscal year 17-18 fund balance using the cash balance as of the draft fund financials that were provided to us by our external auditors as the starting point for the fund balance process. So just really quick why there would be differences between the 2 years. As I mentioned before, we didn't have audited 17 financials when we were building the budget in the spring and early summer. So what we had to use was the cash balance as of the last completed audit, which was fiscal year 16. We then added and subtracted the various revenues and expenditures using the unaudited numbers that we had available to us. There were also some journal entries from fiscal year 17 that had not been booked when we were building the budget, so we used estimates for those entries. The new balance, which we're now using, starts from the cash balance from the 2017 draft fund financials that were provided us from our auditors. Historically, the city has used the cash balance as the starting point in developing the budget. There were a number of adjusting entries that were booked between the last time we presented the budget and today, and that will contribute to some of the differences in fund balance. And as I mentioned earlier, we received draft fund financials from the auditors. There may be some additional adjusting entries still required. My expectation is they're relatively minor. They had a few questions about some entries in the Avalon Transit Fund still, but from a dollar amount standpoint, I don't think the cash balance starting point is going to change significantly from what they presented. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the fiscal year 17-18 beginning balance. So the August 7th, that would have been using the 16 numbers plus or minus our unaudited revenues and expenditures. And the third column on the schedule shows the beginning fund balance used for 17-18 based on the cash balance in the draft fund financials.
Wait. It says 17-18, but that's actually what we're starting with 18-19.
So in building the budget, we start with the 17-18 number since we don't have the 18 audit completed.
Right.
We're starting with the beginning balance from fiscal year 17-18, which is the cash balance at the end of fiscal year 17. So these aren't the beginning balance for fiscal year 19 numbers. These are the beginning balance for fiscal year.
This is the corrected, okay.
This is the corrected number for where we start
Based
fiscal
on
year
the
18.
okay.
And we would never have just given timing, the audited 18 numbers. Right. So the audited 17 numbers is kind of our starting point, and from there we're estimating based on what we have in our books as far as revenues and expenditures.
So the local transportation fund has $384 in it?
And that is to be expected. Generally, how the local transportation fund works is that's the MTA funds we receive, and our expenditures, in theory, match 100% what our revenues are, and any additional expenses we have related to transit fall in the Avalon Transit Fund. So we would expect that at the end of the year would be a nominal balance in the local transportation fund.
Okay.
So although we don't have audited numbers for 17-18, I'm assuming that you feel confident that there weren't any major journal entry problems as we found in 16-17.
I don't anticipate there being anything to the extent. There was an assumed $1 million transfer in last year's budget that were to occur in fiscal year 18, but we did not include that in our budget as presented. Similar to what we saw in fiscal year 17, there was an assumed transfer from the successor agency to the general fund in fiscal year 18 that we did not include in the budgets that we've presented. So it's the same issue, if you will, but as far as what we've presented, we've assumed that transfer will not occur. So I wouldn't anticipate anything like that in this budget.
Okay.
But then there's the unexpected.
Well.
So the next slide is now the projected fund balance for fiscal year 19. So this takes the starting point from fiscal year 17-18, plus or minus all of the revenues and expenditures we had in the last fiscal year to get us our essentially estimated starting fund balance point for the fiscal year 19 budget. Then we also have the operating revenues, operating expenditures, internal service revenues and expenditures, grants, projects, et cetera. The next slide, we're going to go over what specifically has changed since the last version of the budget was presented. There were only a small handful of changes impacting operating expenditures. We did not make any updates to operating revenues. I believe I shared with council a few weeks ago the tourism-driven revenue estimate for fiscal year 17-18, and it appeared that our revenue estimates, at least for the tourism-driven revenues, were in line with where the actuals appeared to be. But we did not go through the exercise of updating the revenue or expenditure estimates.
I'm sorry, what does internal services revenue mean?
So that would be my time, Denise's time, the finance and admin and certain functions that help all of the funds.
Okay.
We bill the other funds for that time for our work.
Got it. Thank you.
And if you're having a hard time looking at your screen, Devin just placed the presentation in front of you if it's easier to read.
Okay.
And Matt, when do we put grant monies in the general fund?
So there would be, so for example, the Pebbly Beach revetment is a general fund capital project. And
So it's not considered a street or?
So the street fund does roll up into the general fund.
Okay.
So I believe there is a Fund 105, which rolls up as a general fund that's specific to capital projects. So like road repairs or the Five Corners project would be an example in this budget.
And it's, okay, because what it does psychologically is make the general fund look inflated. I mean, that you look at, if those grant funds are expended.
So so you're right in that we only receive the grant funds if we spent the money. We do have the expenditures in the project field, so it would be our estimate that if we were to spend the money on those projects, we would then seek reimbursement, as we spend that money. So if we're spending money on a grant-funded project, we would also be receiving ideally the grant money shortly thereafter the funds are expended. There is a delay, and it's our goal as a staff to kind of limit the amount of time between where we spend the funds and where we get the grants reimbursed. But you will see that in some years we will spend the funds in 17, and then we receive the grant funds for those expenditures in 17 and 18. But the budget, we're trying to reflect what the true cost of those projects would be, and that's why we put the grant funding in the same period as the expenditure.
Do you handle insurance reimbursements the same way?
The insurance?
Yeah, and reimbursements?
Yes.
Okay.
So the next slide here is just kind of a bullet point summary of some of the changes we have made since the last time the budget was presented. As we've discussed, we have changed the fiscal year 18 beginning balance to reflect the cash balance based on the draft fund financials. We also reclassified the COPS expenditures from the harbor to the general fund. We had moved them from the general fund to the harbor since the service is really patrolling part of the harbor. But that money is grant offset, and since we had booked the grant revenue to the general fund, we decided to move, it made more sense to move the expenditures back to the general fund. We could have moved the grant revenue to the harbor fund, but it would have been a wash either way, so it really didn't, as long as they were both coming from the same fund, we felt either would have been appropriate. We did increase legal service expenditures by $140,000 to cover anticipated litigation. The other change,
And that sub-account is specifically for litigation?
that sub-account is specific for a particular litigation matter.
Okay.
That was our closed session
And
item.
what did we end up with as an annual, just general services amount for our legal fund? Does anybody? I
can pull that out
Okay.
and run a filter after
Okay.
the.
So Matt, I had a couple of questions then if we're still talking about fund balances
Yep.
that were beginning fund balances. So the original budget that was presented showed a $750,000 fund budget for fuel dock, and now it's zeroed out.
So when they present the fund balance in the draft fund financials, they roll up the fuel dock under the harbor. And so what they've done historically is when they present in the draft fund financials, they only show us the harbor, and that's inclusive of the fuel dock. So how I presented it, that bottom number is the harbor and inclusive of the fuel dock. But I don't know from the draft fund financials that were provided to me what of that cash balance relates to the fuel dock and what relates to the harbor, but since they both roll up ultimately under the same harbor fund, that's why we don't have them broken out.
Okay, but in the detailed budget, you will have them broken out, right? Because we track the fuel dock as a separate enterprise.
We do track the fuel dock separately, and you will see the fuel dock revenue specific and the fuel dock expenditure specific. Just for the purpose of our audited financials, we only show the harbor fund inclusive
As one
of.
fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we still will be able to see how much net operating revenue or net operating loss the fuel dock is making based on how we present the budget, but how the audited financials roll them up together as one entity.
Okay. Could we ask them to do it as two separate? I mean, why did we show an allocated fund balance originally for the fuel dock?
Are you referring to on the capital improvement project list?
No, in the budget that was originally presented, in the summary of fund balances that we started with, it showed $747,000 allocated to the fuel dock and $2,362,000 to the harbor.
I mean, that's something I could talk to the auditors. I'm sure they could provide us with what those cash balances are. I would imagine they could split them. I guess I don't have the full answer as to why we historically, as far as our audited financials, grouped them together. I'm sure I could get their number that is the harbors, and I could discuss with them the reasoning as to why they present them together.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, as the budget was originally presented, there was 31,000, and now it's up to 396. Is that monies that we anticipated to spend and we didn't?
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. So where was it? Saltwater fund. Currently you're showing almost 400,000 as a fund balance.
Yes.
And originally we were showing
we're showing it
only
zero.
30. Close to zero.
So the cash balance that we use historically as the starting point for the budget doesn't necessarily, or doesn't take into consideration accounts payable and accounts receivable. So if as of June 30th, we have revenue that we're anticipating to come in for the activity in that fiscal year, it wouldn't appear in the cash balance portion on the balance sheet. It would show up as an account receivable. Similarly, if we've been invoiced for a service that was performed, but we haven't physically cut the check, it would show up as a payable. So if you look at the details in the draft fund financials, for most of the funds, it's a relative wash when you look at the receivables and the payables. But in the case of the saltwater fund, there's accounts payable as of June 30th, 2017 of approximately $400,000. In talking to Bob, why we use the cash balance versus, say, the working capital, which would be the current assets minus the current liabilities, he said different cities do it different ways. Historically, he said smaller cities have typically just used the cash balance as the starting point, and I think with the rationale being that, generally speaking, the receivables and the payables somewhat wash each other out, so it doesn't significantly impact the starting point, but in this particular case it really does, because we didn't have any receivables coming in as of the June 30th, 2017, but we did have a number of payables in that fund. Again, when we're putting together the budget, we are making estimates and assumptions. I think this would be a good argument of why to potentially use working capital as the starting point, but historically the city's always used the cash balance as the starting point. And so we decided to be consistent with how prior budgets have been presented and use it as the starting point. But I do believe the true balance, though the cash balance is $400,000, I think the true balance is closer to what our estimate was presented in August.
Okay.
And it's budget making, as Bob has come to teach me, is part art, part science, and there's definitely different approaches you can take.
Okay.
The other changes we made since the budget was last presented is we did adjust vacant positions to have a mid-year start date. I believe previously we had them starting or hired as far as 3/4 of the year, but we've since made those adjustments, and so that would impact the assistant city manager position as well as 2 public works positions, one being a part-time, one being a full-time, that are currently vacant, as well as 1 part-time recreation position. And then lastly, and we'll go into it in more detail, we did make adjustments to our capital expenditures, and really we can look at those adjustments in 2 different ways. We looked at some capital projects where we thought we could defer or remove the project from the budget or defer it for future budget considerations. And then there were other capital projects that we updated our estimates to reflect what we felt realistically would be expensed or encumbered in the fiscal year 19. So for example, the Pebbly Beach Road revetment, we originally put the full amount in the 19 budget, but looking at where we're at in the fiscal year and when we're looking to start, and Bob will be able to go into more detail than I can, we've updated those estimates to reflect our anticipated expenditures in the fiscal year 19, rather than the total cost of say, the project that was previously presented. So this is the second category that I was just talking about, and these are capital projects where we reduced planned fiscal expenditures and as well as offsetting grant revenues to reflect what we think will actually occur during, assuming the budget's adopted, what would occur during this fiscal year. The Pebbly Beach Road revetment was the example I used. The project must be completed by the end of 2019 in order to keep the grant that we currently have been awarded. But we adjusted it to reflect half of the expenditures occurring in this fiscal year and the other half occurring in the next fiscal year. And that one, I didn't put the grant on there, but it is, I believe, 80% grant offset, so I know the $1 million is a huge number, but I believe the cost to the city after grant offset was $360,000, so the cost in this fiscal year would be $180,000 and $180,000 in the next fiscal year. Similarly, some of the changes we made in the capital projects, and again, Bob can speak to it better than I could, is looking at completing the preliminary engineering on certain projects, so that way we have the ability to pursue additional grants. But in order to keep the projects moving, we did want to allocate enough funds in the budget to at least complete the preliminary engineering. And so you'll see that change to the green pier repairs as well as to the sand and sediment study. Mole Phase 2 was another one where we're looking at what we realistically would expend in the current fiscal year, and so we reduced it in half considering the time of the year and where we're at with those projects. And then lastly, the fuel dock closeout was a pure reduction, and that related to a settled legal matter, which I'm assuming. Well,
Yeah, good job. Yeah.
So these are the deferred capital projects or one-time expenditures. So we looked at, and as you can see, a lot of these relate to the general fund. These are things that we can look at in future budgets, but we felt they were projects we could look at in future years and not necessarily in this fiscal year. And again, Denise or Bob can probably speak to these greater than I could.
I have a question, since that page and the next page are all Bob. Instead of waiting till we get to them and look at, is it possible to talk about those now?
Happy to talk about
And
them
then
now.
it just follows the flow and then,
Okay, so we backing up a page, or?
well, that one, like, so the Pebbly Beach Road revetment, I think we get all that.
Okay.
I understand everything so far. On the Cabrillo Mole Ferry Terminal Phase 2,
Okay, and so we're just going to be doing the preliminary engineering, so we're leading up to the project, and
No, I
so
get it.
it's going to be a year of developing all the project documents, get the permitting. It'd be a year and 3
Yeah.
months, could be a year and a half.
No, I know. So my question
Yeah,
is...
so that's the kind of the burn rate on the preliminary engineering.
Right, so my question is, though, we had a grant for the bathrooms,
Yes.
and when is the deadline for that?
There is a portion, and I believe it was like 400,000, that was some old money in there, and so that's what we have to use, within this year. And so it seems with the preliminary engineering, we're going to be successful with doing that piece of the grant. But some of the other, because it's a whole bunch of different types of funds in there, and they're all rolled up, but there's some timing on one piece of it that we need to get done.
Yeah.
Okay?
And
That's not construction, so.
Yeah, because I guess that's my concern. No, I
So
talked to-
those were just design and engineering grant funds for that restroom?
No.
No.
There can go for design, construction, whatever the project needs to be. And so the first front end of it is the design piece of it.
And I guess, how do you design a bathroom bathrooms when we don't know what we're doing with that whole big piece of property? How do you do?
That's part of the bathrooms, it will be one design effort for the whole project.
Okay.
So, and that could, and that's also looking at the floats, because we did capture some more money for the
Right.
floats at
Okay.
that time. And so that environmental document, that design effort, all that preliminary engineering will look at all of that at once. So once
Okay.
we get done with that, we should know and have a good estimate of what that cost is, and then what could be in or out, with the funds that we do have, because then we can select those things, and then the pieces that maybe we over-designed on could be additional phases in the future, but I mean, we still need to comply with whatever the project description scope was, what we said in the grant, which is the building and some work to the floats.
Again, I think just to echo Annie's, because I share the same kind of concern, because there's a lot of moving parts in the terms of the grant funding that's been hanging around, to the extent that we have Audra and Townsend on top of that, making sure that if we need to go back to the funding source and say, you're a piece of a bigger deal and we need an extension or something else, that we're doing that, and
And we've already
just making
done-
sure.
That's part of the grant
I'm not
agreement.
suggesting you're not, I'm just saying that that's, the kind of stuff that I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and
So do I.
just want to make sure everybody's, because it's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah,
That's-
so we're executing a grant agreement, and all that's in that consideration, okay? And so that's really what's going to kick off the Moles Phase 2, okay?
Right, okay.
Okay, and I just want to say, to the extent that we can keep a handle on all of the money that we spend on consulting fees for design and engineering versus actual construction, that's my general hope, is that we really keep a lid on these costs.
That's always, I've been in the business for
Yeah.
a long time, and I realize those costs can get out of control, so, and that's what I'm here for, to make sure that we're overseeing that.
And do we want to, since these are all Bob, go to the second page? And, because I think we don't
Yeah.
have any more questions on the first page. And then on the defer to remove, do we want to look at those to see if there's something that we think either truly needs to be in, or this makes sense?
So my recollection of our discussion, Mayor, was that we wanted to keep the city security cameras, that we thought that was important, but that the access control monies did not seem to be something that needed to be done.
We
That's what I
cut
went
down
back and
from
looked at my notes.
40,000 on the access control. I think we had reduced it to 20,
Right.
Pam.
Right, I
But we
think
can
that-
put back in whatever you want.
Right, I'm just saying, the discussion and consensus among council, because when I went back and looked at it, was that the security cameras should stay and the access control should be zeroed out. That whatever had been done, obviously up at the,
Warehouse?
at the warehouse, thank you, was appropriate, given there's, tools and things to be protected and so forth, but the ability of people to monitor individual doors here in City Hall at this point was not as important as some other expenditures, but that the security cameras, in terms of any concerns there are about people abusing or, so forth, would be monitored adequately with those cameras.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a consensus?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Is that a consensus?
Yeah.
So somebody just got 20, so there's an
So
extra
there's
20K out there.
Right.
No, 14, because we spent
14.
6.
Oh, 14, okay.
And my vote would be Via Casino, the backside, the harbor-facing side of Via Casino, get those monies.
We do have 17,000 set aside for security cameras in the harbor.
No, not,
That's
I
separate.
mean repairs to Via Casino Archway. Yeah,
And so the estimate on that I had a contractor look at that was 30 grand.
yeah, well, I'd
Okay.
like to find the rest of the money.
But it needs a lot of detail work to that, because it is historic, and we need to not just put a coat of, what we did was put a coat of paint with our own staff on it, but we got to get on that back side, and we got to remove some of that loose plaster
Right,
that Lisa,
okay.
and then get it back to where it is. And-
Well, my concern is that we get a few more storms and that's going to remove the plaster, and then we're in a worse situation than, so I would just want to make a little asterisk next to that to see if we can find 12,000 to complete that project this year. Pretty fast.
No, we need 18.
18?
16, we just
We added-
we just get 14, and he said it's 30. So I need 16. Give or take a pound. Okay.
Okay.
Automated time for speakers.
That was Lucas.
Solved out for $25.95.
Yes, thank you.
For now.
Thank you, Scott Campbell. Thank you, Scott Campbell.
Should I write him a check? Were we going to reimburse him for that?
I don't know.
No, he said it was a gift.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then cabling equipment, okay. Was that for here, right, in City
Yeah,
Hall?
so-
Okay. Cemetery mortuary improvements? What will, when you say exterior improvements, what are those that will be deferred?
If you've been up at the mortuary lately, you'll notice the same as the Via Casino, the plaster and also roofing and all that, and the cemetery is a long-term project, and we do a lot of that work with, most all that work with our own crews. And so really, what we want to see in the long term, we did finish the new cemetery, but we want to get some new fencing so it starts matching. And then all the way down the front, you'd see that fencing and the landscaping and some pavers. So when you come up there, and that could take, 1, 2, 3 years, that's fine. And then on the back, we need some new fencing. But then really to take and make that mortuary, not embellish it, but just get it to where it needs maintenance right now. And so that's what our vision is for the cemetery, because we think we got the irrigation under control and the planning, but we need to still continue that work. So really what this is materials. Just kind of allocating materials, and as we get time in the year, we get up there and put some time into it. And we're going to continue doing that as labor, but it's how we need the materials. Okay?
So you do have some money in there for the improvements in the budget, or did you wipe the whole thing?
We do
Wiped it
have
out.
our own labor available, but then it takes away from things that we're doing elsewhere.
Okay. Okay.
Do we
So
need the
the-
fencing? Absolutely, we do, because it'd be nice when somebody passes away and flowers are left, that they're not gone within an hour.
Exactly, yes. Did you have questions on that?
Well, just a general observation that what I'm hoping to see in terms of recommendations for expenditure of what little money we have is that it's allocated to things. So for instance, is the building leaking? Are there, conditions such that it needs to be done now, and how much is the minimal amount to fix those kinds of continuing damage things as opposed to appearance or those kinds of things. So I think that, Mayor, I agree with you, the exterior improvements, my question would be, what portion of those monies that you would originally propose would be appropriately spent just to make sure it's not further damaged?
Yeah,
I would say
preventative.
for the mortuary, you need about 10 grand to dig into the roof, and if you look at the backside of the building, the plaster is cracked in a big way. And so, and Matt McBride can take care of the plaster, but, just anticipating there may be some costs for additional materials that we just don't have on hand, which would be sand and cement bags, which is not that costly, but, it's just, it's not a huge ask, 10 grand. It's just like, that's what we need to put into the building to keep it up, or, so that all of these things, it's been, can we get some materials on it? The fencing, It's nice to have our security up there, but right now...
Again, I'm not talking about stuff that's nice to have, I'm talking about stuff that if we don't do it next year, we're going to looking at twice the expense, like Via Casino.
Okay, so I'd say
Yeah.
10 grand for all of them.
Okay.
For those 3 items there, you put 10 grand, at least I'm making progress, and I'm taking care of the worst set of circumstances.
Okay.
I would support that.
And just so everybody realizes that when we have the green barrier fencing up there, that's what we'll have for a few years. And then also, the pavers or whatever, and those kind of things won't be in if we don't have the funds to get them. So and that's great. We just let everybody know that we're working on it, and when we get the money, we'll put it in.
And that building is actually used by Glenn?
Yes.
Yes.
When you first go in the main door, Public Works crews have painted it. They've put some new flooring. This has been in the last couple of years. Glenn has it all set up very nicely, so you can go in and you can view or just make other arrangements. And about the same time as my mother, Glenn had the licensing from the mainland came and made sure everything was up to par, and we were okay. So.
Oh, okay, great.
He gets I don't know if it's yearly or not, but it just
Okay.
happened.
Okay. So we're looking at 10K.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else for Bob right now? Got anything else on there, Bob? Doesn't look like it, huh? Thank you. Okay.
So what the next slide shows here is a side-by-side comparison of the fiscal year 19 drawn fund balance and ending fund balance based on the budget last presented in August and the budget being presented today. Any variance in the ending balance is going to be as a result of the changes that we've discussed, as well as the changes to the fiscal year 18 beginning balance based on the audited or draft fund financials.
Annie, I see you looking for this slide. I made copies of our original presentation, and Matt had adjusted it again, so I apologize. You don't have it before.
Okay, then I'll just look at the screen. Thank you.
So again, just so you can read it, we're looking at the general fund. Since the last time the budget was presented, the decrease on fund balance in the general fund has gone down by $40,000, and that's after considering the $100,000 we moved back in for the COPS program, as well as the $140,000 in anticipated legal expenditures. We still managed to decrease that fund balance, drawn fund balance, by $40,000. The harbor is the most significant, and that's based on the capital projects largely that we discussed. And then the other accounts with nominal amounts deal with just incremental savings, primarily due to the adjustments we made to labor, moving the vacant positions to mid-year.
And I know I've asked this before, but I can't remember the question. So the solid waste fund balance, does that include the trust funds for closure costs?
That does not include the trust fund, other than the amount of money that we've budgeted to
Make the payment.
To make the 100,000 payment?
Correct.
Okay.
But that does not include the trust.
And what is it that we're contemplating to do with those funds?
Well, at one time, Pam, and I know we had, when we went for the Prop 218, there was a new, in the MRF inside, the flooring, the new concrete had to be poured. We still need a new roof.
Okay. Okay, so there are capital projects that are in the offing.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's been brought up to my attention, and I thought I'd use this presentation as an opportunity to kind of cover just high level, general, some of the trends we're seeing as far as operating expenditures and revenues, specifically related to the unfunded liability. As you're aware, in the last tourism report, we're happy to report that overall visitor-driven revenues increased by about 4%. In fiscal year 18 compared to fiscal year 17, again, using unaudited numbers. However, we are seeing a number of operating expenditures increasing at a rate greater than our operating revenues are increasing. One that we're highlighting and we discussed before was the workers' comp. But another that I wanted to spend just a few minutes touching on relates to the unfunded liability. As noted before, our CalPERS unfunded liability increased by about $120,000 and for the fiscal year 19 budget compared to the last fiscal year. So I thought I'd begin by just covering in general what is the unfunded liability.
And I'm just going to make a comment here because it's my kind of personal observation that when we schedule something as a study session, especially at 10 o'clock on a Friday, the public is not going to be getting this, nor are the city employees. And that was really the audience. I think all of us know about and understand what the CalPERS unfunded liability is. And I think that Matt's time and our time might be better spent if we move that to a regular meeting on a Tuesday night when other people could hear this, unless...
We can certainly go over it again. You're saying just
I think rather than go over it again, that we just include it on the next agenda. And the only suggestions I would make is that I think when you just talk about $100,000 or $200,000 a year, it sort of obscures the fact that it's a $7 million number that I would like to be able to send some information to you that I think might be included in the presentation to round it out. But I appreciate everything that you had done. I think that that's a good basis for it. And that's just my, I mean, I don't know what the other city council feels about the rest of you.
CalPERS now is 71% funded.
70, yeah.
They've had a good year.
And that's an aggregate of all the various funds. So the PEPRA funds are closer to 95% funded. And it actually, in one of the later slides, and I won't spend too much time on it, I was actually happy to put this one together, not to call out the classic miscellaneous, but the prior actuarial analysis for them for fiscal year 2021 was about 100,000 higher than the current estimate. So it actually, I know these seemed like large numbers, but relative to some of the other figures I had seen, it's somewhat good news considering the full context. And then just to let council know, I will be attending a CalPERS conference next week, and there will be a couple study sessions specifically to how cities can manage the unfunded liability that I'm planning to attend, and I'd be happy at a later date to share that information.
So great. Yeah, so people like me still don't understand it, even though I'm in this CalPERS thing. And I guess the bottom line is, what is the thing is if everybody quit at the same time?
So in general, right now CalPERS doesn't have enough money to 100% cover its obligations, its retirement obligations. And this is, we're talking just specific to the retirement, not considering medical in these numbers. Yeah. So the unfunded liability is essentially the difference between the money they have on hand and what their total obligations are to cover people's retirements. And the way they close the gap is, or one of the ways they look to close the gap is by these annual unfunded liability payments that cities are required to make to help essentially true up the difference between the obligations versus what they currently have in the fund. Okay. And the reason the numbers change every year is because they consider retirement rates, the average life expectancy, termination rates, as well as you can see, 61% of CalPERS is funded by investment earnings. So if the market is doing particularly well, that helps meet its obligations. I believe the last time CalPERS was 100% funded was prior to the 2008 recession, and it took significant losses as a result of that, and I think that prompted the creation of the PEPRA. So newer employees have a different retirement plan than the classic or the older employees, and the goal with that was to help cities essentially and help CalPERS members better manage the increased costs of retirement.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you.
And I think what's significant too is that the city pays 100% of the unfunded liability, but when you look at how the retirement is funded on the front end, the employee shares a portion with the employer, right?
Yes, so and I do like the dollar amount so the employer's contribution is, and I believe that is factoring the unfunded liability, is twice the amount of the employee's contribution. The percentages on here, that is the normal contribution that the city makes based on what classification its employees are. Avalon has the 4 classifications that are listed on the screen. So I'll take myself for example. I am a PEPRA miscellaneous. So my paycheck, my CalPERS, my PERSable compensation, if you will, the city does contribute 6.8% towards my retirement. And I believe my contribution percentage is 6.5, but I have to check. But it does vary based on the employee classification type, union MOUs. There's a number of factors that go into how much the employer versus the employee contributes, and not every case each case is somewhat unique.
Okay. Good, thank you. Yes, sir.
Just to kind of direct counsel or anyone listening, if they are interested in learning more, I found the League of California Cities did have a study and findings, and it was really worded, I felt like, in a fairly easy to understand way, so I did include a link. I also, in there, they discussed the percentage of the employer contributions relative to general fund operating expenditures. I was somewhat happy to report when I calculated what our fiscal year 19, we were 8.6% of our operating expenditures were employer CalPER contributions. That put us somewhere between the 50th and 75th percentile compared to other cities. The average city for fiscal year 18, so I am comparing 19 to 18, so it's not a perfect analysis, but the average for fiscal year 18 in California was 11%. And one of the things they highlight is that percentage of general fund expenditures is increasing and relatively significantly. Their anticipation was by fiscal year 2025 that the average contribution percentage for a city in California would be close to 16%. So that is one of the concerns that I think the study highlights, and it did a good job, I think, in presenting that information. So I would encourage, if anyone's interested, to look at that study.
And the workers' comp premium increased by 48%. Is that because we have a pretty bad track record?
So I don't anticipate, knock on wood, obviously, I don't anticipate our workers' comp increasing similarly next year. So there's 2 factors that go into the workers' comp calculation. One of it being our performance history. The city was above average, if you will, as far as a claims rate goes. We didn't have the worst score, but we were below average in that regard. The other factor, and I believe this is where most of the increase comes from, is it's based on our payroll costs, and the estimates that were previously used were less than the estimates we provided them this year. Again, I think where they had gotten their estimates from was us and then their anticipated increases. So this year when we updated them with the actuals, it moved us into a different tier, if you will.
Okay. And then we keep track on our accidents and whatever by department to know where things may happen the most, and then try to alleviate that situation. I know that Bob's doing training, you had a training the other day, however, and I'm not going to assume they're all public works, but do we kind of keep a track of where those are happening? And
I don't know if I have it by department, Annie or Mayor Marshall, but I have it, a total list of the city of Avalon, and I keep getting updated reports also as as the bottom line of how much money that
Right.
our insurance carrier keeps paying out on it.
Right.
And
And
the
I know-
case, and the cases that get closed
Right.
and investigations that are ongoing.
Because I'm sure Joanne tells you too. But if there's a way to know if there's, is it psychological stuff? Is it,
Whether it's physical or
psychological or whatever, and how we deal with, anyway. Just a thought. Okay.
So in summary, and this is a slide I think we previously presented, or at least one similar to it, our operating revenues are covering our operating expenditures, but capital projects, even grant offset capital projects, are still requiring draws on fund balance to pay for those projects. And what we've previously mentioned, what we've listed below, are some potential revenue sources if council were interested in pursuing those. One being a cross-channel wharfage, and just as a amount to gauge, a $1 round trip would equal approximately $650,000 a year. That is the only one that wouldn't require voter approval. To increase TOT would require voter approval, but a 2% increase would generate about $900,000 a year. As well as we could increase our sales tax by 0.25%, and that would generate about $250,000 a year. But those last two would both require voter approval. The last bullet that we put down is if we did want to finance the projects using housing funds, it's our understanding that the funds we have currently set aside in our housing fund could be available for either non-housing purposes, or we potentially could borrow from the housing fund, and that would be cheaper than pursuing other financing sources. And so we are just listing that as something that we could potentially pursue.
And so when you say use it for on non-housing things, that's because you would be borrowing from it and paying it back. That's some.
That would be one option.
I mean, how else?
And
do
that
you-
currently, those monies are sitting in our LAIF account and earning 2%. So if we were to borrow from ourselves, we would
Okay.
suggest, obviously, to pay that 2% interest that we would be losing.
But we'd have to be borrowing on something that's generating more money. Right. So what would an example be? Doing something that would then generate money back to pay the 3% interest or whatever we would decide.
Well, it's an option that we're trying to give you tools to move through this. And so, one was the wharfage.
Right.
We do have the housing funds, and as Elizabeth Hull told us, it was probably 3-4 months ago, she said when we refunded those in 2015, those funds became eligible to use for any infrastructure for the city. So it just doesn't need to be for housing. It could be eligible for any infrastructure. And I guess staff would suggest that if you have heavy leverage with grant funds and you need a match, you either can borrow, and then there's some other source that, as we're looking for additional grants, but we're trying to also hit those targets of when those grant funds have to be spent. So it just gives you another tool to move through that. Not that you want to kick the can down the road,
Right.
but it is a tool that we could use, maybe in the short term, or you could decide in even the long term that that's more important to use those funds with a leveraged grant to get the bang for the buck.
Oh, I understand that, and that's great. My concern is if to borrow that money, then you would have to be, if we're borrowing the money, we would have to be putting into something that's going to generate money, and
If you
capital.
want to have housing funds left.
No?
But you could just expend it for infrastructure projects
Right,
and
right.
non-housing.
Right.
And so, depends on what your goals are to do.
Right.
And we're continually working at additional grant funds. Okay, we just want to give you additional tools to find
No.
a way through this right now.
I get it. Again, Ole, and you help correct, when he said borrow the money,
We have to pay it back.
I know, but there was a comment about, but we only make 2% on our money, and I'm saying, okay, so we're saying then we borrow the money, but, and then we would pay it back at a higher rate,
But with what?
But
What
with
we pay?
what? It
Yeah.
would have to be an income-generating thing that we're creating, something that's going to generate money to pay it back, not just putting in a sewer pipe, because we don't make money off a sewer pipe.
Yeah, we do.
Or you pay us,
Sewer fund does.
okay, but we don't want our sewer fund paying us back at a 3% interest because we're not getting it at the bank, right? Are you jerking me around?
No,
like that?
it's like, anytime we issue a bond or something like that, there's a revenue stream against it.
Right,
Okay, this thing, we're talking about, we're deferring money from either the sewer fund or saltwater fund or general fund and using these borrowed monies, and we're going to pay the borrowed money back at the same rate we're paying now, 2%, or earning now. So it's just an expense of the department. It's a general fund expense.
I know, but then you have to increase something by 2% to have that extra money to pay it back.
Or you don't spend as much.
That could be also in your fee structure if there was borrowed funds.
Okay, I mean, this is stuff that I'm,
So, if
Okay.
you borrowed it and you need to put a sewer project, it's just the cost of funds that would be put into the fee structure, and you would try to use that first with the leverage so that you could multiply your funds. That's what you're trying to do, is
Right.
build your infrastructure and multiply the funds that you have, the small amount of funds you have, and hopefully create, 9, 10 times what that amount is. That would hopefully be our goal.
right, okay. All right, so I'm just trying to understand.
And as you know, we're just listing some suggestions.
Oh, no,
So now it's up to
it's-
you guys you have the hard decisions to
No,
make.
that's great. I appreciate it.
If I could,
Please.
Mayor, I would be interested in looking at at a point, if we were going to look at TOT, in terms of clawing back for the city the portion that goes for short-term rentals, that now goes to the chamber. I think that when we moved forward with that, we really didn't think through the chamber's role in terms of obviously promoting hotels and so forth, and that there was a clear connection, but I don't really see the connection necessarily with the chamber and the short-term rentals, and that's sum of money that in some ways I think should go back to the city. I don't know that I think a 2% increase would be a hard sell, but it'd be interesting to look at the numbers to see if it was a 1 or a percent plus the funds that are related to short-term rentals, if that came back to the city.
So
what those-
separating the TOT that comes from the hotels and...
Versus-
Right, so when we approved the increase from 9 to 12, the deal that was struck with the chamber is that they got 22%, right, of all of it. And I think that some portion of that properly should have been retained by the city. So I just think it would be interesting to play with the numbers and see what it looks like before we...
And I believe, and I could be wrong off the top of my head, I think we do bring in about 1.4 million in short-term rental revenue, so 22% would be about 300,000. So that is the numbers
Short-term rental versus the hotels.
versus the hotels. I believe, and I could be mistaken, but I believe it's about 1.4 million we collect as short-term rental TOT.
Taking the other side of the argument is the chamber promotes the island. It doesn't promote just the hotels. They promote, you look at the chamber guide, the transient rentals are in there, the hotels are in there, admissions are in there. Whatever we draft's got to go back to the electric.
That's correct. If we were to change that, it would have to go to the
Oh,
voter.
no, I'm not saying that it wouldn't. I'm just saying that we were going to contemplate something. I'd like to look at some different formulations on that. I think that when we did the 9 to 12%, we didn't anticipate that there would be as many funds coming in, and that the amount going to the chamber is probably a lot more than people anticipated was going to be. I know the chamber has a study itself that's saying that its advertising, all the money that it's spending in the summer is simply going to, in some ways is working against us because visitors don't have a good experience because it's so crowded in the summer, and that funds spent during that time period are really kind of not worthwhile in terms of the expenditure. So I just think it'd be worthwhile to look at that. I appreciate what the chamber does, but I think that in tight times for the city, when we've got projects that if we don't get them done, it's going to impact visitors coming.
We already have those problems.
And you're right, we already have those problems, and so we have to look at everybody participating in how we solve those problems.
How much did we give the chamber?
So it's approximately 1.2 2 million, so it's 22% of our TOT revenue, and 1.15, 1.2 million, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
So bring that back as a future agenda item for discussion.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. It's not a pleasant subject, but it's a good point. Yeah.
It's not, no, I appreciate that.
Shared with everybody.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Bob, this was actually a question for you that I saw when I turned the page. You had talked at our last city council meeting about some emergency seawall protection work.
Yes,
And have
so-
we looked at what those numbers are, or is there anything in this budget?
I'm going to put a number at 50,000 right now, and hopefully it's something less than that, just for stabilizing it. And so I'm going to be meeting with the contractor out there on Monday, and I've also started to prepare an emergency application for the Coastal Commission to do that. We think it's going to be straightforward what we want to do. So likely we'll be putting some rock down at the toe of it so that we don't keep on getting that suction of sand. But then there's also bags that you can put underneath that, and then you fill those with concrete, and then it fits that form of what that displaced area. And so those two things should help us get through till we get to the summertime there, okay? And then
All right. If we're going to look at rocks, then I really want us to, if we've already got a crane out there, to include the stretch from the casino to the yacht club, to move those rocks back. I mean, I think all of us went out and looked at just the action that we had last week, that we're going to start seeing further damage on that stretch if we don't pull those rocks back in, which was a project that was done 15 years ago and needs to be on a calendar, on some sort of every 15 years, it's a project
Yeah,
that we
it's a
plan
maintenance
for.
activity,
So
yeah.
I'm going to encourage you to include that if you've already got the equipment and the people doing that. The rocks are there, they just need to be moved back up so that they're effective in rebuffing the waves.
okay, we'll see what type of equipment we have coming over.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
And I'll talk with
So
them.
is that something, I think it's something we need to
So-
provide for in the budget. I mean,
And
it's
again-
an expenditure we know we're looking at.
And
We
I was
do-
going to address that this
Oh,
morning. I
okay.
say it's not in there because I just, at this morning,
Right.
I had made some additional conversation,
Okay,
and I got the phone calls back, so at least we think that it's very doable here in the very short term, so.
right. And I'm a big proponent of, let's protect the seawall and go get the grants from Department of Boating and Waterways. So if those two things align, that's great.
And that's what
I
you
would
saw
applaud
with the
that.
sediment study funds going down. All we're doing is, like was asked, to get the engineering done. And so that's
Right.
what we're
Yeah.
looking to proceed on with. And then at that point, once we get to that, when do we want to do this? Is it wait, because February is when the grant application has to be submitted. So,
Right.
well, we'll hit that target
Okay,
with
good.
this engineering.
Great, appreciate that.
Okay?
And let me ask a question. This is in the budget question, but it's the trees along, any tree, but those going out to the casino, all of those eucalyptus trees that the roots are really, really, really showing, are those Island Company trees?
Going out to the casino. On the hillside?
On the hillside, are those their trees?
There's a little bit of the hillside that's ours, so I just have to look specifically where they are. So there is some areas in between that's, most of that hillside up there is ours.
Island Company.
Between the two roadways.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the way those suckers
Yeah.
are looking. If we get really good rains,
Yeah.
and there's already so much erosion on that hillside, and we really, I'm not so concerned about the rocks as now I'm concerned about the trees.
Okay, so we have, one of the things that's in our budget annually is a portion to be able to get West Coast arborists out here, as the Island Company's using them too. So we get the larger tree equipment, a full crew,
Okay.
and they have an arborist. So I'll have them take a look at that, and that's going to be happening here within this next few weeks.
Oh, sweet,
You know,
okay.
so we get like 2 or 3 days out of a big crew, so that it's more efficient than us trying to bring other equipment in.
Totally get it, but you're,
Yeah, we hit the stuff that's 30 feet and below.
Yeah.
Not the tall palm trees.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that's all. Okay. So tonight, so today, just on the staff's look, I know Denise, has there already been a conversation with Greg Bombard about all this increased
I have a
square
meeting
footage?
scheduled on Monday.
That's going to include that? Okay, yeah, because, perfect. And again, I'm going to harp again because I'm just really disappointed on this letter to the people, to our lessees, getting those numbered receipts, because I see money that is just going, we're not collecting. And in my mind, I'm looking at probably another $140,000 we could probably get for some of these people. And I just don't know why this has taken 4.5 years to get a good letter out there and for us to follow up. Whether the auditor needs to write it, you need to write it, Devin writes it, I don't care. Can anybody tell me why this isn't a priority when it's a fund generator? I don't get it.
I can't say that it isn't a priority, and I know you have expressed your frustration to me, Mayor.
Yeah.
I can say that Matt's going to get right on that.
Yeah. I mean, this is two city managers, the other previous two city managers as well, you know, but I just don't get it when we had one city finance record that says, my goal is to find how to find money. And then I go, here's a good one. And it just sat there anyway. So now that we've got this budget thing going, Matt, I'd like to see that out, and thank you.
Right, yeah. And I know the other priority that Matt had is the non-participating, the people with the short-term rentals who aren't participating in the system.
Right.
Is another revenue generator potentially that is on his plate now.
I know, yeah, that is a big one. And then, you know, and maybe on those short-term rentals that if we're allowing that to happen, maybe we just say that money goes directly to the city, the whole kit and caboodle of that. He's going, it still has to go to the voters.
Yeah, it's still,
Still
yeah,
has to
until
go.
we have a voter
Okay.
approval, we can't change that.
Oh, well, good trying. Okay.
Well, is there any more that we wanted to cover?
That's what we have prepared, but we're happy to answer any additional questions.
Can I ask questions of the departments? If this is...
Just so you know, the harbor and fire, they already had prior commitments before they knew of this.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
I'm sorry they're not in attendance.
No, that's okay. Bob, what are you going to talk about?
I'm here for questions. I'm just
Well,
showing the road.
Yeah, I guess of the departments that are here, planning and recreation, and maybe we kind of went through this the first time, but is there any big plea for anything that, oh my God, this is cut out and this is devastating to your operation as a department? I know y'all work.
We need, of course, I'm always getting asked to do more, you know, and to keep things up at a higher level. We are, you know, I am going to bring our work plan to you and show you how I plan to use those resources that you're giving us. And so I'm working with that with our maintenance superintendent and with our lead men to define those things that we're doing and have
And
those.
Bob, just to interrupt, for both you and the city manager's benefit, what would really help, I think, the city council is to see sort of a general fund balance cash flow. You know, some scenarios that you're talking for the next 5 years out that is, you know, I think it's appropriate to assume certain grants, you know, like the Department of Boating, Water and Ways and so forth, but to just see how we're going to try to leverage what money we have left to
Okay.
do those projects
And I
that
did-
are out there.
And I did prepare a cash flow, I think, for about 1.5 years when we initially, the last go-around.
Right.
Okay? And
yeah.
then that'll be part of what we were talking about with the CIP, hoping the CIP being part of the budget itself, and they'll have a document, and so there's other cities I've worked in, we've done that, and in that it has the cash flow, so you can see it drop in there, and then you can say, oh, this is, if we really want this done, we need to drop some cash in here. and then this is where
I mean, you're thinking
Yeah.
5 years out.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking
Yes.
5 years out in
It'll be
terms of the
presented to
monies.
you.
Okay.
So we're actually working on actually updating our sewer plan, our CIP plan, and that right now we're actively doing that, so.
Great. Sorry to interrupt.
No. So anyway, I asked the question, everybody's kind of good? Mandy, you're good?
So we have those 2 vacant positions, so I would like to see that those stay in there. Also, we haven't really received any funds on equipment, and we also have a lingering, need at our maintenance yard. I mean, our buildings are not in good shape, and there'll be likely some activity out there that we've got to take care of the ground out there anyway. And I have suggested before that we're paying $70,000 a year to the Island Company for the rental of our garage or lease of our garage, how to consolidate all that and get it put into a program where some of those cost savings from renting that property and all of that can be combined with the new building out there as we're taking care of maybe some new paving on that. So I'm going to and that's not asked today, I'm just putting that on the list that at least we got to have to be able to do some engineering out there so we know what's ahead, because there's some things out there that, they could be safer, they could be better for containing, all of the things that we use, our supplies and chemicals and all those things, and we know some of that takes an investment to get that done.
Right.
And then having the appropriate equipment. We don't have really a dump truck right now, so we're a public works team without a dump truck, because the dump truck, it was not in non-working order, was salvaged. So, that's one of the top things on our list. We have to have a brand new one? No. We can go over there and we can definitely find something that's on an auction that would be sufficient for our needs here. And the same thing with
Okay, I'm sorry. So why isn't that part of the vehicle replacement fund? Isn't that why everybody contributes to the vehicle replacement fund? To make purchases like that?
Yeah,
And it's one bulk number, right? It's a gross number with all departments, not just...
It is.
Right, but
and then-
presumably all the department heads that have vehicle equipment needs, I'm assuming that's in the vehicle as opposed to equipment, or no?
There is a vehicle replacement fund. It currently does have, I want to say, about $500,000 in it. It does roll up into the general fund, so when you see the general fund balance, that does also include monies dedicated for vehicle replacement.
so it'd be one of those things where you'd see just like a capital project, it's a capital investment. So
Well,
I'm just talking our needs, and I would, these are things that we should keep on the forefront, as I'd be asking again, and I'll be looking creative ways to get those things done and looking for other funds to get those things done as we're out, because these are not just used out of general fund, they're used saltwater repair, sewer, whatever. So some of the other funds and fees could help pay for a portion of these things to get done, but it makes us more efficient in public works to be able to get, and especially the next piece of equipment is a mini excavator, okay? And so all we have is an older backhoe at this point. So that mini excavator gets us in a footprint in the street that's smaller and more, better fits for our community, okay? And again, that could be an auction piece of equipment. So those are things you'll see me ask about. So it always gets down to an O&M plan where it's labor, equipment, material.
Right.
And so those are things you'll continue to hear me ask for.
And are we going to have a mid-year budget review, probably January or so?
I'd say more at the beginning of February. Matt and I had that discussion.
Okay. And just quick, the Tuna Club money, are they giving that to us?
Their rent, yes.
Oh, okay. So,
Or you mean the charitable contribution?
yeah, the charitable contribution part? They just give it to us as rent and we just stick it in the bed different? How does that one different than the yacht club who says, what do you want to do with this? It's the same amount of money, we're just handling it differently?
Mayor, I'd really prefer, so I don't speak off the top of my head on this, because you guys had changed some of their guidelines and that, and
Okay.
I would love to give you a list of what one does and what the other does and the bottom line.
Okay, and then
that-
we're paid up and all that. Okay, thank you. Okay.
And I know Mike Krug's not here, but he's previously mentioned this to me before. While the fire truck's in good working order, if down the road we need to replace it, it would be about $1 million to replace. Again, it's in good working order as far as I understand, but it's just something to keep in mind that he's mentioned to me, that we'll need to develop a plan to eventually one day replace. Again, it's not an urgent need as far as I understand, and Mike could speak to it better than I could. But that is something he has previously mentioned to me, and since he's not here, I thought I would.
No, good, yeah.
And he's working on some grant for
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, because that money we're getting from Hamilton Cove is slow. Okay, questions or comments from staff, or is our goal to adopt this thing today? With changes?
That would be our goal, yes, so finance can move on.
With the changes that,
So-
do you
And
want
whatever
to
else you want
reiterate
out
the?
of it.
Currently, I have 3 changes noted, one being adding the security cameras back in for $6,000, adding additional funds for the Via Casino Archway at $30,000, removing the access control, that would be $20,000, and then adding an additional $10,000 for the cemetery. So the net change would be $26,000 increase, but that would be spread across different funds. The security cameras are an internal service fund, as well as the access control. The cemetery is a general fund expenditure, and the Via Casino Archway I would have to discuss, but either general or harbor, depending on where we consider its location and the harbor's coverage. So I would need to confer with, I guess, Denise on what the most appropriate fund would be for there, the Casino Archway.
So we did discuss the $50,000.
Yeah, I would add that.
Whether if we want to include this now or at the next council meeting.
And just because, just so, Bob, I was coming into this meeting, he said, I got a number now. So we didn't have it
I think we need to
yesterday.
include that.
Okay.
And what's the 50K for?
The 50 is for the
seawall.
emergency seawall
Oh, seawall.
protection,
Oh, right, okay.
and hopefully via the casino walkway areas.
We're not going to move rocks, we're going to add rocks. Coastal doesn't want to
I think
move
at one
rocks.
time we had
We
code in
moved
there.
rocks last
We had an
time.
extra code we were going to put in at one time. Is that still taken off the board? Or?
That was taken
Based
off
on-
and moved to
Is there some other
mechanics
project
for the time being.
You guys are into
and-
that.
I would sure like to see one more code put back on there. I mean, I know everybody needs one more guy, but to me, codes get, with all this new traffic and bonds and everything, we had a code. I guess we had it before in there, and then we took it out for the mechanic. So I would like to see if we could get another, even if it was a part-time code. I don't know.
How about if we come back with that figure at the mid-year budget
That would be
review?
great.
That'd be good, yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed the,
Code force officer that was taken off before.
Yeah.
And,
Somebody that covers weekends and nights.
yeah, I would like to see a little more, we're getting more stuff for that.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Well, no, you're exactly right.
and just in terms of revenue, I had some discussions with the city manager and with Jordan Monroe about bringing back the idea of having some meters on Metropole. So I'm hoping that when we look at some transportation stuff,
They have ones now that are still in one unit.
Right, yes. My
Instead of having-
favorite lot in Long Beach is at Cherry and Fourth.
Yeah.
It's got 28 spaces and one solar-operated credit card. It calls your cell phone to let you know that you've only got 15 minutes left. It's exactly what we could use there. And they're about $7,000 a piece.
And are you talking about like on Metropole?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then if it goes over, the ticket automatically spits out. Or it goes on their bill.
Yeah, well,
Goes
it
on their
means
credit
code
card.
doesn't have to mark,
No, I know.
it doesn't have to mark tires.
Yeah, no, I know.
And people don't have to move parts.
And right.
It's just to
And
get
you don't
out
have
of
to go back and put something in your cart. It's all automated.
Right.
All right. Well, with the changes then, first of all, I just want to say, I appreciate, Matt, that this has been like baptism by fire. And you've done a great job. You've risen to the occasion and really dug in and done a good job with giving us the information that we need. And I know that, I was a little anxious and vocal about these things, but I appreciate your willingness to answer questions and find the information for us. And with that said, I would move that we adopt the budget with the 3 changes that,
Just to clarify the 4
4
changes.
changes, I'm sorry.
Second.
Move to second. Comments? Call for the vote.
Is it lit up? Is my board lit up? then?
Signify by
Sorry,
saying
what-
aye. Aye.
That's all right, yeah, raise your hand for
Raise your
aye.
hand.
Aye.
So 4 ayes and 1 absent.
First time sitting with this thing. Next time you'll have to show me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all the departments.
Thank you, council.
You're welcome. Oh, meeting's adjourned.
I'm gonna rock down below. And we talked about moving the rock back. I don't know, moving the rock in the water.
I will make these changes and circulate the final version to you.
Well, I mean,
Oh, gosh, more paper.
I'll send them in PDF, so you
Okay.
can choose to print them or...
Okay.
Pam, would you
Yeah?
suggest the unfunded liability coming back as like a presentation at the beginning of the evening, so we can make
Yeah.
sure that the different associations could pay attention to it? I really thought, that's a
No,
good idea, but
yeah.
I thought you wanted some of that information here too, so that's
I
why.
appreciate, why you would have thought that, but then when I started thinking about it, I thought, I
know.
think
It's a complicated matter. and
Yeah.
I don't understand.
I'm looking forward to the CalPERS conference next week,
Yeah, and maybe
so-
we want to wait until after that to
So
sort of
the-
incorporate
so
whatever.
the conference I'm going to go to is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe
we'll
the
be
second
putting this
second
meeting
meeting.
in November.
Yeah.
Just so I can have some time to digest. And I'm kind of late to the game, but I'm hoping I can actually, they do a one-on-one consultation. So I'm hoping I can find a time, but
No,
all
I
the
know,
time's
but
filled up
and
quick,
then
so
I'll
I'm on
text-
standby
but
for
I have
that.
my